Apple Knocker Radio.
All right, Carl, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it. After reading your book, Source Magic, I've been watching some of your lectures and your interviews as well, and really fascinating stuff. I watched the one on Aleister Crowley and Rudolf Steiner last night. That was really, really interesting. But so speaking about your book, Source Magic, all right, it's a collection of various essays on numerous topics, but there's a core thesis at play in the book. So for the people who haven't read the book yet, and by the way, viewers, I recommend you buy the book. It's right there. It's an excellent book. Could you please explain a little bit about what the core thesis is, the core idea?
Yeah, I seem to, I write in the preface of this book, the Source Magic book, that I seem to be almost, pathological. I keep thinking about these magical themes and writing about them from a perspective that I have come to call a magico-anthropological perspective. And it's also the occultural perspective, which is, of course, a merger between the occult and culture. It's very interesting stuff, and it sort of really preoccupies my daily life. I keep thinking about these things, and then I write essays. I'm invited to lecture at different places. And then usually what I do after a while, and I'm quite productive, so they amass pretty quickly, and then I turn them into books like the one that you have there, Source Magic. And it's basically an anthology of essays and lectures. And at times I can I wouldn't say doubt myself, but I can feel an inclination of doubting, does this make sense? But then when I read them, especially in this kind of anthologized format, I think it does, because there is, as you say, a red thread. There is something there that connects everything. And that's my belief, which is kind of like a core belief that we carry from early on, from the very first years of being actual Homo sapiens. We have done things and acted in ways that have strengthened us as individuals in terms of survival. Also, the little tribe, little community that eventually down the line grew and became more abstracted and I guess intellectual in a way. And that's this thing that we seem to have an inherent need of transcending our rational mind. And what that means is that, you can't solve a problem with an approaching predator, an approaching lion or a mammoth, whatever it is, by reasoning or figuring out a model. You just have to act really fast, come up with some good things, and, not be too rational about it. And then, of course, to deal with the fear and inherent angst that these people had, our ancestors, in the darkness, in the big forest or the jungle, there's so many lurking dangers, and you feel a need we have to have some, extra help with this. So you create this thing called forces or gods, which I argue is stuff we have inside us already, but we need to connect with that extra kind of layer of, again, something that helps us make fast decisions in order for us to survive. And that down the line, that developed, it became more and more, ritualized, it became more magical. Some would say shamanic. I think that's a pretty good word, because we have indigenous shamanic cultures that still live in this frame of mind. It's not book learning that they have. It's like oral traditions and just very living traditions. So you can argue that, yeah, sure, before it was called written historical times, we can only speculate, look at little shards of archaeology and stuff. But since we have these cultures that actually still exist and have been, the way they are, they've been like that for thousands of years. So it is very likely to assume that whatever they're doing, we all did a long time ago. And as, we talk about genetics, we talk about how we have our traits, biological traits, personality traits. It's all moving along in the gene pool, in our chromosomes. Then, of course, whatever we have experienced and whatever our ancestors have experienced has also traveled in the genetic mass. So that kind of primal need to transcend the rational mind in a kind of a ritual sense in order to survive, I believe is an absolutely integrated part of our psyches, our beings. And that I would say is like the fundament of my, I don't know, perspective that I then build things upon, specifically by looking at contemporary things like, you know, pop culture, and see how this relates to this core that I believe that we all have.
Yeah, I think something that people, an interesting discussion is when you explain that thesis, the way that would apply to art and culture, I don't think that's too hard of a logical connection to make. But where it gets interesting is the science and how this human proclivity has actually led to what we think of as hard science today, which we think of as a purely rational, purely logical construct. But you make a really interesting case that's not where it was birthed from. It was not birthed from logical processes. It was birthed from like a magical process, a consciousness process. But could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of, you can look at it from many different angles, but one of the most interesting things, I think, is to actually talk to scientists or people who believe in the, you know, almost religion of scientism in a way, which is like you have such a faith in statistics that it takes on a cultic, you know, proportion. However, everything that's done empirically, and I'm not knocking any science, I'm all for it, and the empirical method in order to see what actually really works in application and implementation. However, they seem to have a hard time leaving their kind of rigid tunnel vision thing about where ideas come from. They all know that they have had like quirky, crazy ideas, maybe even ideas that they haven't been daring to tell their colleagues about, you know. But behind every great idea that's been proven by the empirical method, there is wild, speculative, irrational, intuitive movements in the mind and in the thinking. It's not cogitation, it's intuition. And the most beautiful question there is, what if? You know, what if you take these elements and mix them together? The peers might not accept it until it's been churned through the empirical machinery. But that doesn't change the fact that everything, all the ideas that have made great changes in human evolution, human culture, comes from this sphere, which I would call, you know, a magical sphere, because it would be too, I don't know, denigrating in a way to the great magic to just simply call it irrational, because it isn't. Magic also has something else. It has an appreciation of life. It's very life-affirming, life-enhancing, and it has this sort of daredevilish attitude of what if, you know, let's do this, let's create these forces and call upon them, and, you know, so we want to heal this sick person. I'm going to travel to see my, you know, totem or power animal and see if it can help out. It's like a big flux of energies moving back and forth in a pursuit of a solution to a very distinct problem. And of course, everyone loves a problem solver, but in our culture, it needs to almost come from like a university or a clinical lab or anything like that to be, I don't know, validated in a way. But still, you have these people who can, you know, heal people at a distance, or just be very inspiring to people to deal with their own trauma or problems. And it works on so many different fields in our culture. When I say our culture, I don't mean specifically the Western one. It's like, you know, in the human cultures.
Oh, right.
There's always that element, and there's always the magic there in every culture. It just takes on different forms. It's been treated differently. I would say the harshest treatment has been in the monotheistic religions and those cultures, whereas in let's call it the polytheistic ones, usually have much more lenience or liberal attitudes towards crazy rituals, colorful endeavors, working with the mind as such, and just accepting the fantastic capacity of the human mind, and of course not only alone, but in communication with and conversation with other human minds. So I think that's one of the key things, is that magic is something extra. It can be very hard to sort of explain. I think at one point I had one definition that is that magic is like a neutral mind frame that allows for all the definitions of magic to pass through. So it's like one that accepts and realizes that we can't really nail this down to some kind of formula. Aleister Crowley tried, magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. But in that sense, he sort of, in my mind, sort of debased it a little bit. He made it into a rational process without taking into account the great powers of the psyche, without taking into account emotional aspects, and all these things that make up for human individual being.
It seems like a lot of that might just be the very human impulse. That's one of the things I appreciated about your lecture about Crowley and Steiner, was that you respect both of them, both of their minds, but you still deal with them as human beings, and you refuse to kind of like idolize them. And I think it's possible that Crowley is attempting to make it this strict kind of science was an attempt to be respected, or at least taken seriously by mainstream people in a way he might not have otherwise been if he didn't couch it in those terms. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think it was a brave attempt. And it was certainly it was in the zeitgeist, it was in the times, because there were so many breakthroughs going on in science, in physics, in biology, in psychology was like booming. There were all of these approaches of looking at smaller and smaller particles and trying to formularize. That was sort of the name of the game. And of course, I think, as you say, he wanted to not be looked upon as a crazy magician with wands and stuff, although he waved them around, but still to have some kind of system. He created great systems that are very, very usable. But I think also it misses, it's a brave attempt, but it misses the mark in the sense that it becomes too much. It becomes almost too rational and too disregarding of the, let's call it, the mind-blowing aspects of magic, because they are important too. And they are, in my theory, absolutely crucial, because they're part of this transcendence that gives you the insights that you cannot get by strict cogitation, by strict logic, by strict causal thinking.
Yeah, so I want to get back into a big picture item, but while we're quickly talking about Crowley, who you do also discuss in the book, there's a point that you make that I think is really interesting, because obviously Crowley and Thelema, they remain very controversial to this day. And I think to some extent it's understandable, because he was always projecting kind of a very dark, not always, often projecting a very dark kind of sinister kind of feel. But it's interesting to hear people such as yourself and others who are interested in the subject, but you don't look at it as a dark thing, right? And you talk about how, like any spiritual system, and that's not to marginalize, but I'm not saying like it can be reduced to just like any other system, but like any other system, that it can be a very powerful tool for personal self-transformation.
Yes.
And that's a way that I rarely hear people talk about it, right? Because you even have the people who are pro-Thelema. There's a lot of people who are maybe a little bit unhinged and are all for the, the Babylon working kind of thing. Yeah. And then you have the people who are just so anti. They're going to look at it as the manifestation of Satan, no matter what.
Yeah.
You look at it, you present it in a way that it's a tool for personal transformation. And I was wondering if you could talk about that both specifically to Thelema and generally in spiritual processes.
Absolutely. And I think also that when you're young and you're looking for these cool things, controversial or something that terrifies mommy and daddy. But you usually delve into these topics and the occult, and most of it is, of course, just like speculative hogwash. And then you have, because we have such a big market now of good literature, also, and good editions of Crowley and many other. I would say, almost contemporary writers. Let's call them modern day writers. There you realize that you get enchanted by the magic. You get sort of lured in, fascinated by the glamour of rituals and the systems, the planetary systems and the elemental systems, and basically the hocus pocus aspects of it. But when you are growing up, and I was in that system for 30 years in the Crowleyan system. And the thing is that it takes a while, but if you're a critically thinking person, you realize, well, this is connected to something else. It's not just the hocus pocus and Crowley system. This is a philosophy of will. It's Thelema, means will. And then you realize, whoa, hasn't there been other people talk about this? Of course, it's Nietzsche. And before Nietzsche,
right.
Schopenhauer, it's the philosophy of will, basically from a, pretty elaborate, not strictly German, but Central European philosophical schools that are at the core of this. So if you go back and look at Nietzsche, of course, there you have absolutely brutal incentive to individuate, to become your own. To discard everything and peel off all the layers in kind of an aggressive Buddhist way, in a way, peel off and get to the jewel in the lotus, as they say. And Schopenhauer was, of course, very interested in Indian religion and philosophy. He was enamored by the polytheism and wisdom of Hinduism. So there are those strains much earlier than Crowley, but what Crowley did was probably at the right time, the right place, and he enchanted people, glamorized people by all this magical, stuff. And that's very good. The stuff is useful if you realize that it is methods, rituals, psychodrama, things that can help you program yourself to become more of the person that you want to become. And again, there you have it. It's the Nietzschean. It's to become. It's all about becoming something. So we can trace that to philosophers of a much clearer disposition than Crowley's mind. However, without the magical trappings, and they can be attractive and they can absolutely be useful. But if we look at what emerged after Crowley, meaning basically after the Second World War, and you have the hippies being enamored by the Eastern stuff, and then you have the harsh 70s, and you have chaos magic and the Temple of Psychick Youth, and many other things that sort of carry on the philosophy of will, but try to find a different methodology to sort of break away in a way from Crowley. Crowley isn't old hat; it was very, very new hat at the beginning of the previous century. But he seems to be a little bit old hat, because it's that classical Western ceremonial system. Whereas I think kids today are probably working with mimetic meme magic and TikTok magic and using whatever platform is there, and that's absolutely natural. And that for me reinforces my theory or my thesis is that every generation will work with what's available to work their magic, reach the transcendence, communicate and network, all exchanging information in order to survive. And now that everything is moving along so quickly, so rapidly, there are new technological feats like every month, every week, and we are just like little, tufts of grass in this technological wind. We have to adapt to whatever is going on, and I guess it's fine as long as it's connected to some kind of usage that is pro-individuation, because otherwise it's sort of sedentary, it's entertaining and sort of sedating. when you take in things too passively and you're not incentivized to do something with your own life. But that's true of every culture, and every sort of major movement has that pitfall possibility. So I think that what was the original question?
I don't know, but it was a great answer.
Yeah. No, I'm not. It's just like I'm so I just every day I have this realization or insight that we're living in such incredibly interesting times, probably unsurpassed in that sense because of this rapidity. Unfortunately, I think it's because the survival instinct on a huge planetary scale has been activated, and that's why we have to communicate faster. Ergo, the internet. We have to exchange information, internet. We have to wake up on an individual level. Then you have this sort of mass market yoga in a way, which I don't see as a bad thing at all. You have the sort of the ayahuasca thing. And at the same time, you have the old, necrotic structures of the superpowers, the empires, trying to do the final battle. Basically, I don't know, slowly dying, I would say. And this is like, them shaking off the last remnants of life within them. But
considering some of the alternatives, that might be the most optimistic outcome.
yeah, Leah, let's hope so. But I mean, on an individual level, and again, this is worldwide, I think the only way forward is to really encourage an individuation process. And that's something that you could say comes from Carl Jung. He talked about individuation, but it's not only from him. There's always someone earlier. And I think Nietzsche seems to have been like a huge critical mass point that just, went from a black hole to a supernova in a way, and has affected culture and philosophy and thinking and magic ever since then. And this thing is that, and of course it's true for Thelema and all the major magical systems, that you have to become who you are. You have to work on that and not get lost in this maze of rituals and ceremonies or meditations. That makes no sense to work with that unless it gives you real solid insight into who you are and who you want to be. And those are the most magical things the one can work with. Plus, also something that is mentioned in the book, I think it's the last chapter, this thing, memento mori. You have to realize that you're mortal. Time is, time will be up one day. And then hopefully you can look back, if you can be sentient in that moment, and think, whoa, I had a good life in the sense I tried to work with myself and become a much better person, find a life of meaning. Or you can be disgruntled and neurotic and die very unhappy. But I think that's one of the most, beautiful, magical mottos or sayings, memento mori, remember immortality. And then there's the other one. They're so simple and so banal because we've heard them so much. But, what it said above the entrance to the oracle at Delphi, it said, know thyself.
Right.
And those two things, for me, it's like, you don't need much more than that. You can enjoy the hocus pocus and you can work within a system that's good. It's like going to school, you don't love all the subjects at school, but if the education as such is good, it will one day make sense why you're learning about these things. But the main thing remains, you have to be true to yourself and know yourself, and you have to realize that time is one day up. So you better make it a meaningful life.
Amen to that one.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that I want to come back to, a very interesting question, but I also just wanted to ask or share that there's also been like I don't know if explosion, that might be a little dramatic, but there's been quite an uptick of interest back into Rudolf Steiner, anthroposophy and theosophy. Yeah. They've all kind of reemerged, and people are taking a big part of it, I think, was Steiner's The Age of Ahriman, because you could easily look at the time that we're in and feel like this is the Age of Ahriman. And so it gives him like a prophetic power. But there's a lot of people who are taking his ideas, particularly the Ahrimanic thing, and looking at modern events and framing it within them, which is, it's just really interesting to watch. I follow a lot of it because I do love the theosophy, anthroposophy, Steiner. Virgil, I enjoy all that stuff. So.
No, and absolutely, it's you're completely correct, and I think that everyone needs to have, just like, you know, you and we're speaking in English now because it's a language that we both understand, right? And then people from different cultures, they have their languages, but we also have the language of the system that will help us individuate. And we could be, you know, Mormons, or we could be Thelemites, or we could be Satanists, or we could be anthroposophists. You know, we all feel an inclination to join something because of some kind of resonance there. And that's absolutely beautiful, as long as the system itself isn't, you know, derogatory or vampiric or whatever. But one thing that ties in these particular examples with what's called occulture is, of course, you know, the huge success of the Swedish painter Hilma of Klint. You know, constantly an exhibition touring somewhere in the world, and it was the most visited, most successful show of the Guggenheim in New York ever when it was on 2018, 2019, and it was like, who could have foreseen that? You know, because she was just like an occult lady who, she was totally in love with Rudolf Steiner, and she painted and stuff. But he told, I don't think he was too interested in women or love in that sense. He was much more spiritual guy. But anyway, she was in love with him, and she went to see him, and he said that she should maybe focus on like the life of plants, because she had already begun working her abstracted paintings, like more spiritual abstracted paintings. And maybe that was too, I don't know, abstracted for Steiner. I don't know. But anyway, so in the wake of Hilma of Klint's amazing, huge successes right now, people talk about Steiner. It's not the other way around, right? People, of course, you know, can find Steiner in other ways, but it's amazing that has had a resurgence. So people talk about, you know, Waldorf schooling and the farming methods and all these things, basically because Hilma of Klint has become the beacon or the umbrella under which all of these things are now discussed. Because it's fascinating. And there you have it, how culture can become that, beacon is a good word. It can become a beacon to contain a lot more than meets the eye. You know, you can see a painting by Hilma of Klint and you say, well, yeah, it's beautiful. And then you read about it, or you hear, you know, some people, knowledgeable people talk about it, say, oh, this is about that. And she was instructed by these astral masters to paint these huge paintings, you know, for the temple, which she turned into a reality. Yet she was also smart enough, or they had instructed her well, so that she said, nothing can be done with these until 20 years after I'm dead. And she, I think, died in the mid-40s. So in the mid-60s, the family and stuff started looking at this thing. It was still too modern at the time. But then gradually there were more and more shows. And now she's really a big thing. And it was also very well preserved. She made so many paintings. So it's like a gold mine for people in that circuit or that scene. You know, it could just travel indefinitely. But the interesting thing is, she never shied away from her interest. She was arranging seances. She was together with a little group of women who worked with spiritistic and theosophic ideas. And this was all integrated in the art. And the art is now what's sending out these signals. It's amazing. It's like high magic. Totally.
Yeah, and that feeds exactly into something I really wanted to ask you about, because first I want to explain to anybody watching this that your book, and you in general, you are a very systematic and rational thinker, because I'm about to ask to go to maybe some irrational places. So I want to make clear to everybody, I'm taking us here and I'm asking Carl, I want to know Carl's thoughts on this. But because really your book, I think your book could work in a purely materialistic fashion. Somebody could be a pure materialist And they would really only have to be invested in the idea of genetic memory being able to pass along. And your hypothesis, I think, would work in a materialist fashion if you just accepted that there's like a memory that flows with the DNA.
Yeah.
But I'm not a materialist, although, like Robert Anton Wilson said, I don't believe in anything. But I look at it and I think it's most likely that we live in an idealist universe, that it's a whole universe of consciousness. And so the reason why, the question I want to ask is, earlier you mentioned, Nietzsche came along, and Nietzsche just seemed to bring in this explosion of consciousness that got people to change their thinking. You're just talking about this painter right now who came along, and there's this explosion, the Steiner explosion, and there's Crowley. Everybody's being interested in these things that 20 years ago had maybe this many people were interested in. And so the idea that is put forth in books like The Secret History of the World, but also in Steiner's work in general, is that the birth of, and I'm saying this for the audience because I'm pretty sure you already know this, like when reality was created, it was set in motion, this sea of consciousness, and there was a very specific design for humanity and where we were going. And through the course of time, there are periodic periods. There are periods of explosions in consciousness that create these just things turn left and right, and all of humanity starts to pivot towards a new thing. And then, within 20, 30 years, human consciousness as a whole, there's always going to be differences, but as a majority changes. And I'm wondering, because your book fits so perfectly in with that idea. And if you're willing to go on that, imagination adventure, what do you think about that? Do you ever consider that as a possibility for the mechanism behind these things?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. And again, survival is a key to this, because if I'm a strong believer, I accept the natural sciences, and I believe in the natural sciences, and I believe in nature most of all. And I do believe that Darwin was right and Linné was right, in their rational structuring of looking at, I guess it's not logical progression, but it's biological progression, and why these things happen. And of course, as we know, there could be huge extinctions having to do with, let's call them macro disasters, volcanic eruptions that sort of create so much smoke that it sort of kills everything in that region. However, if under good circumstances, changes happen because change is needed. If there is one little species, they're used to live in their paradisical harmony, and then comes predators from somewhere else, they have to change their behavior, or they will become, food for the predators, and the predators will take over their paradise. And if we look at it not as a singular instance, but something going on over a long period of time, a la Darwin's and also later scientists, assumptions, then these changes happen in the genetic material because of changes in behavior. It's strongly linked. And that, again, survival of the fittest to what? Well, the fittest to survive because they adapt to the situation at hand in the fastest possible way. And that trait, whatever they came up with in the moment, probably from some epiphany or working together in a chaotic moment, then is moved on. And the kids who adapt to this quickly will survive and have kids who are more likely to survive, etc. It's really a kind of simple process. And I do believe that's how things work. So, and it also reinforces my thesis in a way, because all of the things that we talk casually about, the fight or flight instinct, the instincts specifically. But what are they? Well, they are just traits that we have taught ourselves along, let's call it linear history or whatever you want to call it, along with time. And we are today very refined, very sort of meta-sentient beings, because we can talk about these things and speculate about these things. Very unlikely that other species do that. They're just still on the survival level. But we have that, capacity for abstraction, and thereby science also, really meticulously picking things apart and looking at what it is. I mean, I can't see my genes. I guess in some kind of mechanical electronic tool, you can look at genetic material. I mean, we've seen images of it, so someone can actually see it and take pictures of it. And they say that this is it. This is a chromosome. I've never seen one. I've seen pictures of it. I've never seen, other miniature or microscopically small. I've never seen an atom. But we have all seen what the conglomeration looks like. What the genetic material of me looks like this, and it speaks like this. And I come from a long line of ancestors, as do we all. And at some, primordial time, we will have ancestors in common. And the same thing with the atomic. I can see material objects here on my desk, and I know because someone has been, picking things apart and looking closer and closer and closer, and say that this is the, atomic composite of this and this and this, and I accept that. That said, I think that again we are in such interesting times because it seems that we can either make very intelligent, hyper intelligent decisions, the most intelligent decisions we have ever made in our history, or we can wait a little bit and be forced to make decisions within chaos and really danger and possible extinction, stuff like that. So in that sense, this has never happened before, because at other extinctions, I don't think they had that similar capacity of amassing data, evaluating data, and then communicating. It was all first-hand sensual knowledge, and it gives us an advantage, but it seems we're also at a disadvantage because whatever we have created that's so great, we seem to be absolutely adamant at destroying, and it's remarkable.
I agree. You talk about the seemingly suicidal impulse of humanity in Source Magick quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar at all with Rupert Sheldrake?
Yes, I haven't read too much, but I'm familiar. Yeah,
he just has an interesting idea about how the role of genes is overrated, and he has proposed this idea of fields of morphic resonance, I think is what he frames them. But that he just posits the idea that these fields are more responsible for carrying on traits of all kinds than the genes themselves. He thinks the role of genes is overrated. He doesn't discount it. He just thinks that it's overrated.
Yeah, but then maybe we can argue that one of these fields is culture, for instance.
Right. Well, that's exactly. Yeah.
I accept that absolutely, because of course it's not just like my little genes telling me to act in a certain way. I mean, we're all social animals. We need each other to survive. So of course there you have human interaction. That's one thing. And then you have extended culture, what people create sometimes and quite often not even knowing what they're doing. If you talk about art, because it's supposed to be an intuitive, creative process where we bring something out from within. And why do people do that? Well, it's completely irrational, makes no sense, but still it's such an integrated part of our life and being human. It's a human trait. And therefore, I think, and I would argue that it does have a function. It's a very important function. And that is to be either some kind of, mirror, a critical mirror about things that are going wrong, or just very, very intuitive, being a sensitive kind of being that sort of takes in this information and processes the information on the inside and then gives something back that person might not even understand what it is. It's just like, again, the shamanic approach, feed the shaman with information or problems or emotions and see what comes back. Because the shaman has as his or her job in the tribe to process and see what's good or bad, usable or not in this process of tribal survival.
Yeah, and that's so fascinating, man. But then that gets in even potentially, and again, people, this is me taking Carl here. Don't blame Carl, because then you get into even like stranger ideas such as egregores, which the fields of morphic resonance could just be a different way of conceptualizing the egregore and the tulpa and the joined thought forms and all of these things. Because then the question comes, and I've actually seen this question asked by people who come upon these ideas and kind of just run with them, a lot of times out of fear, I think, which could be justified. I don't know all the answers to anything. But like the question then becomes, let's assume this idea that there are these fields of morphic resonance or egregores, tulpas, whatever. There are these disembodied conscious forces that inform and influence each other and inform us. And that is what shamans are connecting to. The question then becomes, like, is it one monolithic force, or are there various forces? And do some of those various forces not have our best interest in mind? Do some of them, they do have our best interest in mind? Because people look at these events, like the Jack Parsons one has become a big thing in just like internet lore, where people are really ascribing a lot of significance to the whole Babylon working thing and saying that it opened up this rift, because that's when the modern UFO thing started, right? And so it is a very interesting, like, I tend to stay away from those things because they become very polarized. It's a polarized world that I prefer to stay away from. But it is interesting to wonder if there are these other intelligences using people. And we don't know when they give us these ideas, we love them, but we don't know where they're actually taking us, right?
That's a huge topic. And I think I've drifted from being on one side and now I'm on another side. And it's basically, I used to be quite open-minded and accepting of what's called in the Thelemic lore, praetor natural intelligences, discarnate intelligences, call it whatever. And my take on that some time ago was like, why not? I was very, I would say, inspired and influenced in Kenneth Grant's approach, in the sense that he was so very, very open-minded, and he had worked occultly, like worked with these things, going into different mind frames and states of mind, of states of consciousness, and explore these things. And then you have to take your hat off and say, that's good. Someone who's worked with it, and they came up with this. So it is, in a way, a kind of a proto-scientific approach. However, and then, of course, you have these things like with UFOs and other kinds of influence from the cosmos and all of that stuff. Now I seem to be fairly strictly on a very human side. That means taking a psychological stance or psychological grid or matrix through which I look at these things. And if we just, stop by the Parsons thing for a little while, and so we can disseminate, because I know what it's grown to, and it's become mythic. And that's something that can happen when culture takes on mythic stories and sort of tweak them, give them the turbo injection by TV series, books about all these things. And that can basically happen when something is in the right place at the right time. And also if it carries mythic proportion, which is what happens, when the rocket scientist gets blown up, he's involved with the big bad cult. I'm not talking about the OTO, I'm talking about the other, the other cult that stemmed from this friendship and environment. So, of course, that's fascinating enough for people to become wildly interested in it. And then you have fictional renditions of it, and thereby it grows. And now it's an actual living, fairly contemporary myth. But basically, what happened was just strictly psychological processes where you have this environment that was the original Thelemic environment in California. Very few people had actually met Crowley. Some had been in Cefalù, the Abbey of Thelema, and they came to California and sort of were there as repositories or representatives in a way. And the OTO was there, so they worked on the Gnostic Mass. And it's a very, very liberal environment in terms of actual sexual activities. I would say also drug experimentation, just being, free, spirited individuals like we're used to today in a way. Thinking it's more
proto-hippies.
Yeah, exactly. Proto-hippies. But then, of course, you have this thing where it always goes sour, right? Someone steals someone else's girlfriend, and the person who's so fucking liberal can't take it, and they become angry and disgruntled, and call each other names, and it turns into a conflict. Or someone borrows or lends someone $10, and it becomes a huge disaster. Or someone borrows someone else's sailing boat and takes off with a lover, and that becomes like something that is now occultic proportions in this thing called the Babylon working, whatever that was. We don't really know. We can read the manuscripts and stuff like that, but maybe it was just really highly intelligent but also high-strung individuals trying to be much more liberal than their own inherent morals actually could deal with. So they had a kind of an overheating or a short-circuiting. And then it became so fascinating because they were in an environment of very fanciful creativity. Lots of science fiction writers. Hubbard was one of them, perhaps not the best one, probably not the best one, but still he was, and he came up with these concepts, and maybe he had the most cynical attitude toward how to apply something on the greater scale, whereas I think Thelemites of that era, and perhaps now also, they're much more, tribal in that sense. We do our own thing. It might be good for the rest of the world, but we're doing our thing here. I think Hubbard wanted to monetize, and I think he saw in these people what was happening. There was a great need, again, for individuation, to become clear, to become free of old remnants of father and mother and authority, society, old cultures, religion. So he marketed that and did it in a good way. Then, of course, what happened is very, very interesting. Of course, fodder for conspiracy theories. Parsons blew up. He'd been this really explosive guy and helping actually to make that rocket fuel for whatever it's called, Jet Propulsion Laboratories. Amazing. So when people die young, he was fairly young, then they become something. It's like the 27 Club in rock music. When someone dies at age 27, it's like instant mythic potential, or they get catapulted into some kind of status simply because of the fact that they're dead.
Right.
And then you have, interestingly enough, Cameron, the great artist who was Parsons' lover, carried on in the OTO environment and also afterwards, being like a little beacon of Thelema, influencing Kenneth Anger, mainly, the filmmaker, who, carried on, became like an ambassador of Thelema through his life and through his films that are just so remarkable, and who was one of the key people who inspired me to become involved with the OTO for 30 years, for instance. So you can see how these trails of influence and inspiration are fairly new, but they really work in reality. And some people, depending on, what kind of, person you are, some people take it on and create worldwide money-making, racketeering movements, and otherwise other people are fine in being like in their own solitary sphere, like Anger. But they both have huge influence, both these spheres. I think the problem is that when there's no one left alive to tell the real story, then it's, everything is up for grabs in terms of myth making. And there you have a lot of conspiracy theories waiting to happen. And again, to just tie this in with the UFO stuff too, I think it's a psychological need for an invisible kind of authority, an invisible kind of guidance, because people feel I don't know, disenfranchised. They don't feel strong in themselves, because usually people with a strong core, a strong fundament of individuation, they know what they want to do in life. They are working it. They are very happy. They feel that they are leading meaningful lives. They rarely spend any time with conspiracy theories or UFOs or discarnate intelligences. They're just very happy to be alive and work.
Right. When I talked to Mark Stavish, he actually said, so what if there are UFOs? Who cares? You still have to pay the bills. You still have to take care of your family. You still have to it's funny because it was so dismissive. But then I really thought about it. I was like, you know what? He's right. Like you would still have to be the best person that you can be. You would still have to be the most loving, giving person that you can be, all these things. There would just be UFOs in the sky. You know what I mean? Like really, what does it matter? But so it's very interesting because you now say, did I interrupt you? Do you want to say something?
No, just going to say that the psychological needs we have, they're different from person to person. Some can give it the first person form. So I do this, I experience this, I am happy, I do this. Other people might come from another background where there's a need of a third person thing, where you have a force. This angel gives me the power to be this thing. This demon or this discarnate intelligence gives me the power to do this. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's terminology, right? As long as, the outcome is conducive to something that feels good and meaningful, then it really doesn't matter. You could call it like gobbledygook or whatever. As long as it, has that function of pushing you onwards to finding greater meaning.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's why I always try to be honest with myself and with everybody else. I have a very deep interest in these topics.
Yeah.
And I can intellectually defend my thoughts, but I never try to obfuscate the fact that I am one of those people who is driven by an intense need to feel that there is some kind of meaning. I don't like the idea of life without meaning. It bothers me.
Yeah.
And so I remain honest with myself so that I don't allow my mind to get away from me,
Yeah.
But so you're in this place now where you think all these things, it's purely psychological. And so something I'm curious about, you talk about, because there are many people in this sphere, esoteric sphere, whatever you want to call it, who share a similar idea. And there's something I've always been personally curious, maybe confused about, which is, all right, I'm all for personal self-transformation. I'm all for achieving my goals and being the best self. But the thing is, for me, all that is waking up, writing in my to-do list and staying focused on what I need to do, and I can make my goals happen. In a worldview where all of this is purely psychological, is there really a need for these elaborate like the people who are ceremonial magicians and do all of these things? Is there really a need for it, or do you think it is going too far?
Yeah, no, absolutely think there's a need for it, because there is this other aspect, and that's magic, and that's something that I feel is absolutely necessary. Because if we are only these sort of 10 steps to become a more rational, more efficient human being, and be the best you can be, and all these slogans that now mean really nothing. We can all train ourselves mentally, whatever, to become more efficient. But be efficient in what? It still ties in with what we want to achieve in life that gives us meaning. How do we get to that knowledge? It's not strictly by cogitation, saying, do I like this? Yes. Do I like that? No. You can come a long way by doing that. But a human being is much more complex than that. We have emotional aspects, we have sexual aspects, we have philosophical aspects. Everyone does. And to get to that point of insight or some kind of epiphany, it doesn't need to be dramatic. It can come, for instance, in meditative states. It can come in psychodramatic, meaning like ritual states. It can come in psychedelic states of mind. Basically, you need to leave the everyday frame of mind. You need to transcend it not necessarily transgress it, but you need to transcend it. And that is an inherent part of, let's call it like psychic hygiene. We need to do that to be healthy. Just the same way that we take in new nutrition in order to strengthen the vehicle in a way. We also need to change our mind frame and give it more nutrition so that it can process in a good way. And I'm not only talking about like material, like sugar stuff. We need to transcend it, give it a little bit of a jolt in order for it to become truly creative and come up with these ideas and what if scenarios that we need as sort of springboards or reflective fields so that we can continue to develop, not simply as, I can do 100 push-ups. Next month, I can do 120 push-ups, or I'm going to have a promotion at my job. I have to create these many whatevers in order to please the boss. That's the true like materialistic aspect of success. And that's not a bad thing, not at all. However, you need to still find that you're in the right place at the right time. You have to find meaning. And that I don't believe comes from that kind of rational approach. That's the thing. You need to go irrational to go deeper into yourself and see what it is you are and who you are.
That's fascinating insight, man. And so there's a question I asked, we're coming up on an hour. I won't keep you too much longer, but there's a question I asked Miguel Connor of Ian Bite Gnostic Radio. I'm curious your thoughts on it. So we have, and I saw you were on his show.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to listen to that one yet, but I love Miguel. I think he's got one of the best shows out there. But so we have what can broadly be characterized as a Gnostic viewpoint and then like a mainstream religious viewpoint, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the question I'm thinking of, it could be applied even just to like rationality versus the individuation and the irrationality that you just talked mm-hmm. about, right?
Yeah.
Talking about just broad categories of thought. And so there's this, like you are very big in individuation. Like that's what a human being needs to do, which yes. I agree with. I 100% agree with. Like we are here to individuate, find out what we are, and then become that as fully yes. as we can. But so it occurs to me, or it seems to me that there's something inherently destabilizing when you do that, right? Which is fine. Like I've lived my whole life like that. I don't have any desire to live any other way. But in a whole society really stay, coherent and connected and stable if everybody was pursuing these inherently destabilizing and often like very chaotic tools of self-transformation. Like it almost seems like, as annoying as this is to say, it almost seems like we have to have a base of people that are happy just doing the day-to-day because they give the stability that allows the psychonauts to explore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what you think about that, because it seems sad to me that might be the case. But so do you think that's the case? Like, could you envision a world where everybody went into radical self-individuation?
Yeah, I could. But of course, that's like an ideal or a hypothesis that we will never see because it's just too far out.
Right.
I do believe that, of course, I believe in natural stratification. I do not believe in enforced stratification in any way. But I mean, people are different. People have different capacities. And one way of accepting that is simply to individuate and realize, this is what I'm good at. I'm not going to be like Jack Parsons. I'm not going to be this. I'm going to work with this because it fills my life with meaning. And actually, I mean, I've met a lot of those people who have completely, unglamorous jobs. There's no, fascinating romantic trajectory, but they're just very happy because they know they're in the right place. And maybe it's the psychonauts, those who are feeling such a dramatic drive to go beyond. Maybe they are the most neurotic ones with the most problems.
Right,
maybe that's why they are so aggressively wanting to individuate in a way. That could be the case. So, of course, one could never presuppose that everyone's the same, because that's not the case. We share some very basic traits, but then on an individual level, we're very, very, very different. And that has to do with culture and, capabilities, genetics, a lot of things, general cultural permissiveness. So I think it's a very interesting philosophical idea that you bring to the table here. But I do think that it simply might be enough for a culture to say that it's okay, go ahead, because I think that we're experiencing that. It was certainly in Sweden. I think you're doing that in the US too, basically as the Western liberal sphere. You can do it, to the extent of your capability. And that could be intelligence. It could also be financial power, but there's really no one trying to hammer us down with violence if we feel a bit like a nail, if
right.
we protrude from the board. No one is really going to hammer us down. They might say with some kind of, leering, misanthropic kind of attitude. No, you'll never succeed. You better stay where you are. You'll never do that. But that's usually just their own frustration talking through them. Whereas, in fact, if you have someone who's really keen on getting ahead, they will be inspired by themselves, feeling, taking original inspirations, perhaps from an ancestor or someone else that they've encountered, or it could be someone who's sort of old and deceased, someone from a book, can lead to many interesting things. That's why you have to have this open mind and take in new information, new data, basically, to constantly have this process. Individuation doesn't lead to a fixed goal. It doesn't, end. There's no end line. I think that you have to take that into consideration also. I'm a different person now than when I was 23, yet I am the same person also. It's intriguing. But there, I think that the best thing that a society as such could do is simply to say that we are open for our citizens or members to become as happy as they can be based on their own potential. Yeah. But that requires self-knowledge, and that requires honesty. And that's something that we're not really taught to be.
Right.
On the contrary, the Western liberal democracies is it's not encouraging us to tell the untruth, but there's a very gray area sort of in between the lines there where you get ahead by being quite manipulative. And I'm thinking, for instance, of everyone knows justice, but not everyone knows the legal system. This whole army of lawyers, speaking legalese, interpreting the law, whereas in fact justice is fairly simple, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I think that's one example of how we can create ball and chain of our own intelligence in a way, our own complexity.
Right. Man, Carl, all right. So like I said in our email, I have pages and pages of notes from your book. I could ask a million questions, but you promised me an hour. I asked you for an hour. You gave me an hour, and I have it. I appreciate it. So before we wrap up, and this was fascinating, man. I love this conversation. In all sincerity, this was just fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's do it again sometime.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Carl. I would love that, man. That would be awesome. This is the kind of stuff I love talking about. That's the whole reason I started this project.
Me too.
But so okay. In addition to Source Magic, do you have any other projects that you would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I just literally just a couple of weeks ago finished the manuscript for the next book, which is quite interesting. It's been a very interesting process. It's a magical autobiography in a way, focusing not on everything in my life, but specifically the magical meetings, the magical development, the magical, twists and turns, with a lot of interesting meetings and facts, and many of which I had forgotten about. But that's a good thing about being an I was going to say a hoarder, but I changed it in my mind to say archivist. So I found a lot of stuff, old correspondence, postcards, letters, even faxes that I've kept. And that's been invaluable. Plus diaries, of course. Like I've gone through, I don't know, probably 50 or more volumes of diaries from 1988 and onward. So that's been very rewarding. And that's, I think, is a very fun read because it's not an attempt to mythologize something. It's just what happens. Why does this kid from Sweden become so enamored with the occult? And why does he spend his life working with these things and writing about these things? You'll find the answer to that in that book.
Oh, fantastic. I can't wait. And also the Trap Art channel, that's your channel, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. It's all you on there. I just wasn't sure if like a fan put it together or if that was actually your channel.
No. The Trapar Film YouTube channel is basically me and my wife. My wife has a podcast that's also video called Rendering Unconscious. So she has a lot of material there. She talks to psychologists and psychoanalysts and artists and stuff. And I put up basically films I'm making and lectures, which I enjoy.
I watched a lot of your material. It's great. And everybody out there, I'll put the link in the description below this. Go check out his channel, man. It's fascinating stuff.
Thank you.
But all right, man. Carl, thank you so much, man. And best of luck to you. And hopefully we will talk again soon. I really appreciate it.
We will. Thank you very much for having me.
Take care, sir.